Hi everyone, this is Dr. Zeus, also known as Citizen Zeus in my capacity as an investigative citizen journalist. I decided to try a kind of more gonzo approach here, just straight into my computer to address some of the most recent research that is absolutely affirming what I've said several months ago in May and June of this year, that the COVID-19 virus, the SARS-CoV-2, was in fact not primarily a respiratory virus. That's only the way it communicates, but it existed primarily as what I called a blood, immune, and even nerve virus. The first two of those have been more or less proven now in recent research. It is a blood virus and it is an immune virus. And I even had in one of my videos that it was an autoimmune virus that was deriving from the HIV-like mutation in this particular COVID-19 virus, SARS-CoV-2. I also had an entire video on hybridizing harm, which showed how I believe that the virus itself unintentionally and carelessly got out of a lab in China, which has happened several times in the past, and that it was deadly because it was conducting what's called gain-of-function research, in which people are literally inserting various traits and capacities in this particular virus to allow it to more effectively infect human beings, ostensibly so that we could study possible future mutations. But of course, the risk of doing this kind of thing is so great that actually was banned under the Obama administration, but continued in China. Now, don't blame China, because it was our research that gave rise to us and funded this. And that ban was taken off again during the Trump administration. So we are fully as well culpable in this. You can't blame China on this, okay? And bioweaponry is always linked to this kind of research, but that's not primarily the motivation here. The motivation, unfortunately, was greed around genetic engineering and the patents associated with it, scientific arrogance and trying to really push the boundaries of creating a superbug, and finally carelessness, the ability to let it get out of the lab to begin with. Now, I don't happen to think that this virus necessarily has to be seen in such dire and fearful terms. It's teaching us a great deal, and I've discussed some of those things, about how we need to change our entire lifestyle. From a more sympathetic response where everything's cranked, activity upon activity, consuming upon consuming, to one in which we're a lot more reflective. We're starting to come back the importance of sleep, the importance of hydration, the importance of good health, the importance of a whole food, organic, plant-based diet, primarily plant-based diet, the importance of certain vitamins. And I've discussed all these in the videos, and a lot of this is bearing out. I'm going to go ahead and put myself in the corner here, and I will share with you some of the latest research here that shows, in fact, that that is the case. So here we are. I'm going to put it more toward the corner. There we go. Here we are. And the first thing I wanted to drum up is this. This is a new New York Times article just recently released, which it confirms again what I've said. This is October 27th, just a week or two ago from the recording of this. It says some COVID survivors have antibodies that attack the body, not the virus. Again, new research found autoantibodies similar to those in lupus and rheumatoid arthritis patients. Both patients may benefit from treatments for those autoimmune diseases. Again, back in June, I said HIV-like mutation. Well, I'll go ahead and show some of the conclusions here. But a lot of these so-called long haulers, people are having more chronic effects of this, are in fact are finding that they have basically signs of various forms of sensitivity, permanent or longer term or chronic sensitivity to the products, not even just to the viruses themselves, which oftentimes get eliminated, but to the destabilization of the body and the products that happen as a result of trying to fight the virus off, creating these foreign mutations and cell fragments that keep the body in a state of permanent or very, very chronic or long-lasting inflammation. That's why drugs like dexamethasone, steroids, have been at least helpful on a more superficial level. I maintain, of course, on a longer-term level, we need to really investigate, in particular, vitamin D3, which really helps to balance the blood and especially for cytokine storms, vitamin B3 or niacinamide or nicotinamide, which really helps with regard to the receptor sites and also tonifying the blood, and nasal breathing, among other things. It creates nitric oxide that goes ahead and tonifies and helps to repair blood vessels. So here's what we have from this New York Times article. Viral infections cause infected human cells to die. Sometimes the cells die a quiet death, and sometimes, and especially in the throes of severe infection, like the COVID-19, they can blow up, strewing their innards when that happens, and DNA normally cloistered in coiled bundles inside the nucleus is suddenly scattered and visible. And in fact, I also showed this in my previous videos, some links which I'll provide at the end here, that there was this particular COVID-19 not only was very good in terms of transmitting respiratorily, but it was also the HIV-like function, allow it to slice into a cell or split into a cell and insert its protein into the cell, kind of take over the nucleus. And it even had these telomeres, or not telomeres, but what were they called? Anyway, these kind of tendrils that could scatter the DNA remnants from the internal reproduction of that virus elsewhere. It's really pretty nasty in that way. We just have to be thankful that it seems not to affect kids or younger people or healthier bodies, and that it is in some ways much more gentle than, say, an Ebola or something that could really, really have decimated whole populations. Again, mostly the people that were affected were elderly, mostly above 80. And of course, that's tragic. But at the same time, it is up to us to begin to develop not simply just a medical response to this, but a holistic and lifestyle response to it. So continuing on, in the typical response to a virus, the cells known as B immune cells make antibodies that recognize pieces of viral RNA from the virus and lock onto them. But in conditions like lupus, and in this case, the autoimmune type of a condition created by COVID-19, some B cells never learn to do this and instead produce autoantibodies that glom onto DNA debris from dead human cells, mistaking them for intruders. Sometimes something similar may be happening with COVID-19, the research suggests. Anytime you have the combination of inflammation and cell death, there's a potential for autoimmune disease and autoantibodies, more importantly, to emerge. Again, look at these two things, inflammation and cell death. People with these underlying conditions like diabetes and obesity and older people have a lot more cells dying as a result of the health practices or as a result of aging. So really what that's calling us to do is to find vitamins, health practices, exercise, again, sleeping, etc., hydrating, plant-based whole foods diet that actually not only prevent a lot of that cell death and keep cells healthy, but also scavenge and clean up and eliminate those dead cells. Because then you don't have so much for your, not only the COVID-19 and the ACE2 receptors that they become part of to glom on, but also to have your own body, to prevent your own body from attacking your own dead cells, creating a very dangerous situation. So again, I'm pointing to my own video here that I released in June 17th, and here is the title. This is months ago. I said HIV-like mutation is COVID-19 primarily an autoimmune disease. Now and just now, mainstream science is catching up to that. And here I'll even read the description to the video. Now that it has been confirmed that an anti-inflammatory steroid, dexamethasone, used to treat other autoimmune diseases has now successfully lowered fatality of COVID-19, my thesis in previous videos has been borne out. COVID-19 has a serious implication as an autoimmune disease. Where does the autoimmune property come from? This video shows that this property likely comes from the COVID-19 virus's HIV-like mutation. I explain what this looks like, what it does to the body, and how you might use this knowledge to inform a better address of the viruses and its risks. This, along with saying that this COVID-19 is a blood immune nerve disease, I talk about the vitamins, I talk about nasal breathing, and if you look at some of my other videos, you get a much extensive review of all of that. We are going to find out, they haven't touched on it yet, but that it's also a nerve disease. That one of the best things that you can do to treat this is sleep is breathing, is yoga, is relaxation and reflection rather than endless activity. We keep gearing up with a sympathetic response to activity, but nothing coming down the other side. That's called a parasympathetic or relaxing response. And we are going to find out more and more, and the research will come up in the next half year to a year or maybe two, that these people who sleep well and people who do these practices that create this relaxation, and nasal breathing does that automatically when you do this yogic nasal breathing, that is really going to be a great protectant against the COVID-19, but it's also going to be a great boost to one's health. So if we're to learn anything from COVID-19 and what it's revealed, it's about how important these practices are to engage in regularly. So we go to the next article here, and this is just from Freethink. It's a basic kind of aggregator. It has more of a, I guess you would say, a popular understanding or explanation of some of these things. When a virus, I'm just reading a little bit of what it says. When a virus infects us, our bodies create antibodies. These help the immune system defeat the infection and quickly identify and attack the virus if it infects us again in the future. Some antibodies don't target viruses and other pathogens, so they target our own tissues and organs, and they're called autoantibodies. They're the cause of many autoimmune diseases like lupus, celiac, and so forth, okay? In people with APS, okay, the immune system creates autoantibodies that attack blood proteins, which increase the risk of blood clotting. So now we're seeing the link between an autoimmune response, an inflammatory response, and blood clots, which we're seeing throughout COVID-19 patients in alarming ways. And this was from the very beginning. Again, I tagged these very early on in my videos. So they did a study at the University of Michigan. They wanted to see if there's a connection between the autoantibodies and the COVID-19 blood clots. As I said in my video, there was almost definitely going to be, because they're creating havoc in the body. When you create damage, clots come to take care of that damage. And so again, this is proving to be true. To do that, they tested the body of 172 hospitalized COVID-19 patients for 8 types of APS autoantibodies and found at least one kind in half of the patients. So it's a significant factor. Here's a press release from the University of Michigan about that study. And I'll just read a little bit about that as well. Blood clots continue to wreak havoc for patients with severe COVID-19 infection, and a new study explains what may spark them in up to half of patients. The culprit, an autoimmune antibody that's circulating in the blood, attacking the cells and triggering clots in arteries, veins, and microscopic vessels. So there you have it again, a reaffirmation of that. And here's important, this one at the very end. It says, in patients with COVID-19, this is Dr. Kanthi, Yogan Kanthi, MD, we continue to see a relentless self-amplifying cycle of inflammation and clotting in the body. Once things have gotten out of whack, and your blood, and a lot of times vitamin D deficiency is what allows this to get out of whack and create a vicious cycle, because it helps to buffer and stop that vicious cycle. Once it gets out of whack, you can have this endless loop, as they say, of clotting and inflammation that makes people who are already struggling get even sicker. Again, what we are being brought to is when we see the relationships between these, you can't just bring a whole host of drugs to take care of the symptoms. You need to create a fundamental, holistic, body-level practice if you really want to do this. Not only to address this, but preventatively, to make sure that any body that enters into or contacts this COVID can handle it much better. And we have that at our attempts, but it's not profitable to be selling vitamins and emphasizing, just like the diet industry, it is not profitable for the most part to say, eat well, eat less, and exercise more, and take care of the emotional and mental habits and impulses that give rise to eating. We very rarely, in a holistic way, address those, and we're not doing it with COVID-19. Again, I'm an advocate for that, and here we go. This is from NPR. Clots, strokes, and rashes. Is COVID-19 a disease of the blood vessels? The answer is yes, and more. The disease of the immune system and the nerves as well. And again, we will see those things. In a study published this summer, Lee and an international team of researchers compared the lung tissues of people who died from COVID-19 with those who died from influenza. They found stark differences. The lung tissues of COVID-19 patients had 9 times as many tiny blood clots, microthrombi, compared with those of influenza patients. And the coronavirus-infected lungs also exhibited severe endothelial injury. That's the lining of the blood vessels, okay? So again, there's something about this that's tipping off a vicious cycle, which is savaging the insides of blood vessels. And it seems to target that. Again, it has to do with this ACE2 receptor and certain kinds of things like nicotinamide, which is vitamin B3, can help prevent that. ACE2 receptors are much more available and much more numerous around injury. They signal injury. They're part of recovering from injury. But if they're being hijacked by the COVID-19 virus, which they are, and used those receptors to attach and enter cells, then you've got a problem. You're setting off these inflammatory responses, these hyperimmune responses, and the virus is getting into cells. So you're creating essentially a problem across the board. And what we need to do, and one of the things that some of these vitamins do, including even the nicotine from cigarettes, is prevent that attachment because it has nicotine and nicotinoids occupy those ACE2 sites, out competing some of these viruses. Ironically, smokers, which much less likely to have problems from COVID-19 because of that. It was one of the more ironic things to happen in health history. So again, I wanted to bring forward some of the other 2 videos that I had. I said COVID-19 is a blood nerve disease. I did a 2-part series on this. I did talk about the nicotinoids. I talked about vitamins D and C. And this is all the way back in May. Okay? So we know these things, and they're just filtering out in mainstream science because there's not a lot of incentive to recommend things that don't cost. Things like things like exercise, which again help to work out that inflammation and help to get rid of the dead cells and help your body circulate and get heart flow, blood flow going. The low inflammatory plant-based whole foods diet, hopefully organic, also much less inflammatory, allows the body to recover and also provides nutrients and antioxidants and so forth. Nasal breathing, which especially when it's done with yogic, where you're breathing in for basically 6 or 7 seconds, holding for 8 seconds, and then releasing for 8 seconds. That not only helps with the nitric oxide, which helps to tonify those endothelial linings, but it also allows you to calm your nervous system, creates a parasympathetic response, helps to get rid of the fear that's cranked up around COVID, and also creating a better situation in the body. Again, I will make this prediction now. They're going to find out that our nervous response and our parasympathetic nervous response in particular are key. Those who don't fear, those who go ahead and calm their body, those who treat it well, hydration, sleeping, absolutely critical for parasympathetic response. So let those frayed and active nerves calm down again will be critical in the future. And it's not only just the body, but we see here too that the mind is being affected by this. There are comorbidities, and of COVID-19, the great revealer is also showing the underlying things about how these underlying conditions like diabetes, like obesity, and so forth, is affecting mental function as well. And they don't know exactly what the relationship was, but they do know that back in 100 years ago, during the influenza, the Spanish influenza, they had the same kind of neurological and psychiatric problems. And our bodies are learning to deal with this. Most viruses are information packets. They can overwhelm us just like an electrical charge can overwhelm and melt a wire. But we don't need to freak out. We can go ahead and learn the lessons, take those lessons and go forward. So here's the real lessons from Sweden's approach to COVID-19. This is an Economist article, and I just did it for the headline here, because oftentimes Sweden is held up as either a demon or as a hero because they kind of have a middle approach. They did some degree of allowing exposure to COVID-19 while taking some best practices around mask wearing and physical distancing and so forth to slow the spread. And it actually has worked pretty well for them. And it's not because they're a champion of liberty. In fact, like this thing says, they're the home of pragmatism. I've said in past videos, I think Sweden's approach will be it, because there will be no effective a vaccine to this. I do see that it's acting exactly like herpes and exactly like HIV in its ability to stay within the body. And that the only real way to, quote, fight this is not to fight it, but to learn to collaborate and work with it. As that happens, and as our bodies learn to be in a mutualistic relationship with this, it, along with HIV and many of the other viruses, will continue to live, but it won't have the devastating effect. We will create equilibrium. And that's really the only way forward. At least Sweden has a nod to that. And if you notice, Sweden has a 20% obesity rate. What's America's? United States, 42.4%. More than double of what Sweden has. And again, these underlying conditions are absolutely critical when it comes to these full-blown epidemics that we're seeing right now, where just cases are taking off, hospitalizations are going to take off, and probably deaths as well. Even though it's a lagging indicator, it'll probably take 2 or 3 weeks before the deaths bump. I had thought that deaths were going to go lower as the cases went up, as the more vulnerable populations got hit first. That turned out to be true. We had a bigger spike in cases in the second wave, and it was a lower death rate because that was mostly young people. Now, since the cases are taking off so much, it's this, we're talking a factor of 4 or 5, we may actually get a little bit of bump above in terms of the deaths, number of deaths, but the death rate will continue to go down and is going to continue to go down significantly, just like it did with HIV. Now, of course, herpes was not a fatal bug, but as we know with herpes, when emotional stress comes, lack of sleep and so forth, that's when the symptoms come forward. I do believe the same will be true for the COVID-19 virus. And because it's a respiratory virus in terms of communication, we could easily see sort of the worst of both worlds, where like herpes or HIV, you get stressed and you start getting symptoms in your body. But unlike most of these blood diseases, which you need bodily fluid transfer or open sores to communicate, it would get into your lungs and you could literally breathe it onto somebody else. So I don't, again, think there's anywhere we're going to get away from this. Because if that's the case in particular, regardless if people do get over it and develop some degree of immunity, or equilibrium, they can also bring it back and communicate it to an unexposed person somewhere down the road. So again, there's no getting away from this. We are going to be the ones having to deal with this. And I just wanted to throw this last one in, that the study that the risk of COVID-19 transmissions on planes was virtually non-existent for mask wearers. In fact, look at this because this is, again, counterintuitive. Announced Thursday the results of a study, and this is very recent. This is, again, let's see here, October 15th, within the last month or so. Okay. Well, everyone freaking out. You wouldn't take a minimum of 54 hours of sitting next to someone with COVID-19 to be exposed to an infectious dose on a packed plane even. Okay. So again, there's so many of these things we're doing. And the reason is the plane filtration system tends to disperse these aerosols, okay, and filter them in ways that are better than a lot of other places. So it turns out that much of the panic about being in a tin can is not placed. And this is not some fly-by-night organization. This is Forbes Science reporting. So again, let me go ahead and bring my face back up here. Again, I can't stress this enough. And I've said it in my other videos, and recent research is only going sort of emphasizing this. We have to take care of our own health. We have to support one another in taking care of health. We have to look at the research around physical distancing and the masks and so forth to get some idea. Masks, there's mixed research on how effective it is, but we know that it has at least some effectiveness. And then recent research about being outside and only spending limited time, like you need usually 15 minutes or longer of fairly close quarters contact to get infection. And asymptomatic transmission is possible, but not very likely. If we use these kinds of understandings to even out or slow the transmission of this virus, okay, without freaking out, and using the health practices to allow that virus to be handled quickly and easily in our body. Not so much necessarily easily all the time, but certainly fairly quickly and straightforwardly, then we're going to be in much better shape. And we're going to be setting a template for the rest of these viruses and diseases that come in. We have put too much of our faith in technology to do the work for us, for drugs to do the work for us. Well, we're beginning to see the best, not just weapon, because we're really not in a war with these. We are in nature, they are in nature, but the best tool toward creating equilibrium and a collaborative engagement where we both can learn to get along is to simply have good health and to use the available natural techniques, substances, and things that are at our disposal right now to really make this work. So I hope this has been helpful for everyone. If you like this video, please do subscribe to my channel. Click the like button, and also if you want to, there's a little place to donate. If you felt it's been useful for you, and you can go back to some of the other videos. I'll put the several ones that I reference here, both in the references below and also at the end of this video. So I appreciate your watching, and until next time, this is Citizen Zeus signing off.